Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reva Chambliss. I'm Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee, and I call this meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee to order for July 10th, 2023. Our first item of business today is the approval of the agenda, and I understand there may be a member of the public that would like to address the committee, so we can hear those comments after approval of the minutes if they are here. Seeing no person here for public comments, I would like to ask for approval of the agenda, which actually is not needed, so we will move on to approval of the June 26, 2023 Transportation Committee minutes.
Approval.
It's been moved and seconded by Commissioner Carter and Commissioner Diego Morales. Next, we have to vote on approval of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. With that, the motion carries. We will move on now to reports with asking if there are any reports from the Metropolitan Transportation Services Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Given the large number of items on your agenda today across several program areas, I have no further reports, but I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports from our acting Metro Transit General Manager.
Madam Chair, committee members, just as Director Carlson stated, with the agenda being as long, I won't do a report today, but happy to stand for any questions you have.
Doesn't look like there will be any questions, so thank you. Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, TAC, I believe we will not have a report today. So moving on, we have several items on the consent. Business items 2023-122, 2023-123, 2023-124, 2023-126, 2023-141, and 2023-157. 2023-122 is the Metro E-Line Cooperative Construction Agreement with the City of Minneapolis for Hennepin Avenue South. 2023-123 Metro E-Line Cooperative Construction Agreement with Hennepin County for Hennepin First Avenues. 2023-124 is Metro E-Line Cooperative Construction Agreement with Hennepin County for University Avenue, 4th Street Southeast. 2023-126 Contract 21P304 Hoagland Bus Amendment Number 1. 2023-141 is Metro Mobility Radio Upgrade, Contract 23P161. And 2023-156 is authorization to apply for Section 5311 Formula Grant for Rural Areas Funding Resolution 2023-9. Is there a motion to accept the items on consent business?
So moved.
It has been moved by Councilmember Morales. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Carter. Is all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any discussion? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we can proceed with business item 2023-147. Promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation, protect funding allocation options for fiscal year 2025 to 2027. We have Steve Peterson presenting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a tongue twister right there, but one of the new federal programs that came out with IIJA, and they came up with a creative acronym called PROTECT. So today, we're asking for your concurrence on a tab action to fund 2 new projects with this new funding source. And so Protect is meant to improve resiliency of the transportation system. MnDOT and all states were given a share of the funding, formula funding, at which point MnDOT did give it to regional governments throughout the state, including the Met Council. So that's where the money's coming from, is flowing through MnDOT. And typically, we would have this just be part of the regional solicitation process, but because we learned about this in February, we were mid-cycle, the money was available now, like a lot of these federal programs are, and so we had to find the best use of the money to get projects going down that pipeline. So here's some of the eligible elements of Protect: storm sewer, bridges over floodplains, erosion, landscaping, retaining walls, et cetera. So that's what the money can be used for. So it's very specific relative to a lot of the other federal funding sources we have. So the process we went through, we went back to the last regional solicitation, the 2022 cycle, and looked at the next projects we have a ranked and scored list. So we looked at the next projects across all 12 categories, every mode, and came up with these 2 projects that were kind of next on the list and also were eligible for this new funding source called Protect. And so the 2 projects, one of those was in Carver County, lifting the roadway out of the floodplain by Lake Minnewaska on the Arboretum. Project number 2, realignment of a roadway in Washington County. This is in Cottage Grove, again, out of the floodplain, and that's really what makes these projects eligible for Protect. So the recommended motion before you here today is the Met Council concur with the Transportation Advisory Board action to award $14,518,800 of regional Protect funding for fiscal years 25 through 27. That along with $2,481,200 of surface transportation block grant program to fully fund the Carver County Highway 5 Lake Minnewaska Arboretum and Washington County County Road 19A 100th Street project from the 2020 regional solicitation. So the combination of the Protect and a little bit of our STP money together was able to fully fund those 2 requests. So back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments on the recommended motion? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-147.
I'll move approval.
It's been moved by Vento and seconded by Councilmember Morales. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. The motion passes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we have item number, let's see, it's on this one. The next item is, we're missing it looks like it's 2023-151. It's on the bottom here. Yeah, that's the next one on the agenda, and that is the purchase of 6 low-floor small buses for Minnesota Valley Transit Authority. I understand that before we proceed with business item 2023-151, we have a motion on the previously adopted low-floor business item 127. Councilmember Vento?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I move to rescind the previously adopted business item number 2023-127.
Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Commissioner Tony Carter.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. It's my understanding that from staff that the Transportation Committee passed business item number after the Transportation Committee passed business item number 2023-127 to authorize the purchase of 6 accessible low-floor buses from Model 1, formerly Creative Bus Sales. But before the business item went to the full council, staff were informed that the company was unable to sell buses in Minnesota. The Transportation Committee needs to rescind this motion so that it can address business item number 2023-151 to purchase the buses from another company.
Thank you for that explanation. Are there any questions or any further discussion? Commissioner Carter.
I don't know why I'm recalling that, that when we passed the first motion at the Transportation Committee, I thought for some reason the company we were purchasing from at that time wasn't exclusive. And I'm wondering, that may or may not be true, but it's just occurring to me that that's what I thought. And I am wondering whether this is a recent occurrence that this company is unable to sell buses in Minnesota. Has that been the case before? Or was it very sudden that this happened?
Very good. I'll try to recap
Forgive
since
my
your voice is a little bit low. I know you have a little laryngitis. Commissioner Carter has a question about whether or not they were able to do business in Minnesota before. Is this a recent occurrence, or could you provide further information, Mr. Peterson?
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that question. So, Model 1 has a dealer license with Arbach Bus, the manufacturer. We also have a local company, North Central Bus, who has has an agreement to sell buses with Arbach Bus as well. So when Model 1 began to put the order in for the Met Council, they said, you can't do that. Your dealer license doesn't allow you to sell in Minnesota. We have North Central Bus, who has a legitimate contract for the Met Council to buy off of, which is the state of Minnesota contract. How we got to that was 6 months ago, North Central Bus said, Paul, we don't think we can get you any low-floor buses from Arbach. They don't have any Ford chassis coming in. And we can't promise you a date. We can't commit. So that's when we knew the Oklahoma contract that we bought the minivans from also had these vehicles on it. We began to pursue with Creative Bus. They didn't share with us at the time or didn't know that they couldn't sell in this territory. The other thing that happened was last month, Chevy became Buy America eligible, which is a big deal. Now vehicles can be built on the Chevy chassis along with the Ford chassis and meet the Buy America requirements that we need because of the federal funding we're using. So now there's a lot of Chevy chassis out in the marketplace, and Arbach Bus was able to get quite a few Chevy chassis. So they could commit to dates with North Central. So in the end, I feel, at least as a fleet manager, that this is really a win-win situation for the Metropolitan Council, because we would much rather deal with our local vendor who we know, trust, and will come through in the end for us. So that's kind of the story behind what occurred. And I hope that helps explain kind of the bigger picture on this.
It does. It just seemed a little bit confusing, but I appreciate all of the factors that went into the decision. Thank you. Or the need to change.
Welcome.
Thank you for that explanation. Any further questions? Seeing none, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay, that motion carries. We can now proceed with business item 2023-105, Metro Green Line Extension.
No, 151.
Now we need to take up 151.
Oh,
We
151.
rescinded, now we'll take up. yeah.
Okay, we have rescinded the old business item, and now we're taking up 20-23-151, purchase of 6 low-floor, small.
Madam Chair, once I'm done with my item, this will all go much smoother now that we're done with all of
Okay,
this.
thank you.
Yes.
Move.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
so this afternoon's proposed action is nearly identical to 2 weeks ago, that the Metropolitan Council authorized the regional administrator to execute a contract with North Central Bus for up to 6 accessible low-floor buses in an amount not to exceed $1,500,000. Otherwise, this is identical to what we had before with the previous bus manufacturer. And if you have any further questions, I would be glad to answer those.
Move the action.
Commissioner, Councilmember Carter.
I'll move the action.
Councilmember Carter has moved the action. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
opposed, nay. That motion passes.
Thank you.
Next, we have 2023-105 Metro Green Line Extension, Systems Construction Change Order, and Cumulative Change Order Authority Increase.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Nick Dial. I'm Director of Construction for Green Line Extension. I'm seeking a proposed action to authorize the regional administrator through the council's authorized rep to negotiate and execute a change order for contract 17P000 with Aldridge Parsons Joint Venture in an amount not to exceed $4,524,243.46 for work related to traction power substation foundation designs, and also authorize an additional 7.48% for $14.5 million to the current 10% or $19.4 million cumulative change order authority for contract 17P000 with APJV, resulting in 17.48% or $34 million in cumulative change order authority. And I've got a short presentation to help explain that. Just to ground everybody, so we're talking about the Green Line Extension Project. This is 14 and a half miles extending from Target Field and through Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and into Eden Prairie. We've got 16 new stations, 44 structures, 15 at-grade crossings, retaining walls, 14 and a half miles of track, 7.8 miles of that is shared in a freight corridor. In 2019, we executed a contract with Aldridge Parsons Joint Venture in the amount of $194 million. And to date, we've executed $14.6 million in change orders. About $9 million of that has been for a facility so that we could store systems-related equipment and components during our delay at the Green Line for the Green Line Extension Project, and another $1 million of that was to add the Eden Prairie Town Center Station into the project. Aldridge is headquartered out of Libertyville and has extensive knowledge in electrical and communication systems, and Parsons is their joint venture partner, and they're experienced in systems integration and project planning. The systems contract has 20 traction power substations that it's adding, or that we're adding to the Green Line Extension. It's got overhead contact system with poles and hangers, tunnel facilities, communications and networks, and wayside signaling and testing and integration for the project. That's all currently under construction, starting in the western part of the project and moving towards the east as civil contract work nears completion. So like I said previously, during the design phase, so systems is a little bit different than our civil contract work in that it has a design component that they need to do in order to make their systems to complete their foundation work and add the systems related components to the project. And during that final design, they noticed an issue with how the previously dictated design for the project tied together and identified a need for basement foundations for the project. We explored a couple of different options in order to not require the full basements, but due to right-of-way constraints throughout the project, this is a very tight corridor, specifically through Minneapolis and adjacent to the freight railroad. The full basements were required, and that through negotiations we're at this $4.5 million marker. This is what a traction power substation house looks like. This is 303, which is in Eden Prairie. And here's what a traction power substation basement looks like. And so previously, these basements were not designed into the project. There were some manholes that were insufficient for the amount of conduit required to go into the traction power substation site, and so that required the need for these basement foundations. So that's the traction power substation change order. That's the $4.5 million, and then in addition to that, we're looking for a cumulative change order authority addition. So kind of running through this table, the contract amount was the $194.4 million at the top. We had a 10% authority for the $19.4 million, in which we've currently been deducting our change orders from. Our value of change orders as of June 21st that's 14.59 or 7.51% of change orders. And our current remaining budget for change orders is the 4.848 million or 2.49% remaining. The additional change order authority that we're seeking today is the 14.542 million or 7.48%. And that will bring us to cumulative change order authority for the 33.98 million or 17.48%. That is the proposed action. I'd like to additionally state that the contingency, that this is included in the current contingency for the budget of the approximately $2.7 billion for the project. And Madam Chair, with that, I'll seek any questions.
Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Dial. Are there any questions or comments from council members? Councilmember.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you help explain the additional change order needed? Why that is needed?
Okay,
or how
yes.
that process works?
Yeah, sure. So originally we had a manhole or a structure, a small structure that was required for additional conduit. So let me just kind of go back to one of these sites. Oh. All right. So what happens at these traction power substation sites is there's multiple large conduits that come up and feed into the traction power substation. And the previously designed manhole to take in all these conduits was insufficient for what was needed for the project. And so it required the addition of these basement structures.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to simplify in like just regular language.
Sure.
So you're seeking to spend down the $4.8 million that is currently left in the existing change order, and then you are seeking additional $14 million to spend.
It's included in that 14.54, the 4.5 million.
Oh, got it.
Mr. Dial, I think she may be asking about the additional authority amount. Can you explain
Yeah,
that?
so our current authority remaining is that $4.8 million, and we're seeking to add about approximately $10 million for to come up to the 7.48%.
Okay, so it's the $10 million extra that you're seeking, not the full $14 million. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Duncan. Any other questions? Hearing none, I'd like to take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
I'm sorry. Without any other discussion, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to request if anyone wants to make a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Morales. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Tony. It's been moved and seconded. I'd like to ask if all are in favor. Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have business item 2023-132, Metro F-Line Master Partnership Contract with MnDOT Work Order 12-22103L, and we have Frank Alarcon here to present.
Good afternoon, Chair Chambliss, committee members. My name is Frank Alarcon. I'm a project manager with Metro Transit's Arterial Bus Rapid Transit Project. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm going to be sharing some slides about a partnership between Metro Transit and the Minnesota Department of Transportation on the Metro F-Line project, as this partnership relates to both of the F-Line business items on today's agenda. So the two proposed F-Line actions today are business item 2023-132, same week. This This business item would authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute work order number 12, contract 22I003L, issued under contract 22I003, which is the master partner contract with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Under the work order, the council will receive approximately $2.4 million from MnDOT for preliminary design services for Trunk Highway 65 to be completed in coordination with the Metro F-Line project. The second item is business item 2023-125, also same week. This would authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 22P400 with Kimley Horn and Associates, Inc. for engineering and construction administration services for the Metro F-Line project and associated roadway improvements in the amount not to exceed $17,382,828. So the slides I'm going to share mostly pertain to the first item on this slide, and I'll have some additional information at the end of my presentation to share about the second one. So to jog your memory about which corridor the F-Line is, the F-Line will substantially upgrade the Route 10, which is one of our busiest local bus routes, running from downtown Minneapolis to Northtown Transit Center in Blaine. It'll provide frequent all-day service like all of our arterial BRT corridors. The F-Line will predominantly operate on two important MnDOT roadways. Trunk Highway 47, which is more commonly known as University Avenue, is the approximately the northern half of the corridor, and then approximately the southern half is Trunk Highway 65, more commonly referred to as Central Avenue. So with the vast majority of the F-Line operating on MnDOT roadways, MnDOT is a really key partner and stakeholder in this project, so we're working very closely with them. As far as schedule, the F-Line has been in planning since last year, and that planning process will be wrapping up this summer. And with the conclusion of planning, engineering will be starting this summer to lead up to a planned construction of in 2025 and 2026, and a planned opening in late 2026. So a little bit of background on the partnership with MnDOT on design for F-Line. MnDOT has been leading a planning study to set a vision for the future of Highway 47 and 65, or University Avenue and Central Avenue, over the last 2 years, and Metro Transit has been very closely involved with this study because these two roadways coincide with the F-Line corridor. The MnDOT-led study was really driven by a need to improve safety in these corridors, as well as to improve pavement as this infrastructure ages. And a number of key recommendations for Trunk Highway 65 emerged from that study that we'll be very cognizant of as we move forward with F-Line design. So those recommendations relate to lane reconfiguration. So MnDOT is recommending reconfiguring Central Avenue or Trunk Highway 65 to improve safety. The concept shown on this slide shows what that might look like. MnDOT is also interested in supporting the F-Line speed and reliability goals with the future of Highway 65. And so the bus lane shown in that preliminary concept would help the F-Line achieve the speed and reliability gains that we attempt to make with our arterial BRT projects. And MnDOT is also recommending pedestrian and bicycle improvements, which are also shown in this preliminary concept here. So in order to move forward with MnDOT's vision for Trunk Highway 65 and 47, we've been working very closely to determine the proper kind of contracting method for the design of these roadways. And what we've determined is that an excellent way forward for Trunk Highway 65 is to incorporate preliminary design of Trunk Highway 65, which is shown in blue on this map, into the F-Line's engineering contract, 22P400, which is the subject of the second F-Line business item today. And so the work order, or contract 22I003, would act as a mechanism for the Met Council to receive funds from the Minnesota Department of Transportation to do this preliminary design work along Trunk Highway 65 as part of the F-Line design process. And this brings pretty substantial benefits both to MnDOT and Metro Transit. From our perspective, it's very difficult to design a bus rapid transit station if you don't know what the roadway between stations looks like. So this really eliminates that challenge because it allows for concurrent roadway design with bus rapid transit design so that we know that we're going to be able to design bus rapid transit stations that are compatible with the roadways that they sit on. As far as Highway 47 goes, we've determined that what makes the most sense is for MnDOT to pursue its own design contract for that roadway, and they're moving forward with that. And the F-Line project will be very closely involved in that process. And I should just mention here that as far as construction of MnDOT projects in the F-Line corridor goes, the timing of those future projects is yet undetermined, pending funding. However, we are very interested in the potential of possibly aligning F-Line construction with MnDOT investments in this corridor to minimize disruption for communities along the route. So with that, I'll repeat the first action here and then pause for any questions or actions. So business item 2023-132, same week, would authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute work order number 12, issued under 22I-003, the master partner contract with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Under this work order, the council will receive about $2.4 million from MnDOT for preliminary design services for Trunk Highway 65 to be completed in coordination with the F-Line project. And we are requesting a same-week action for expeditious start of F-Line design work.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm really excited to see that we are at this part and that we are coordinating with MnDOT on the funds and the design. Are there additional questions or comments? Commissioner, Councilmember Carter, I'm stuck on Commissioner.
Thank you for the report. This makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm stuck on not knowing why we have the opportunity for this portion of 65 along which the F-Line will be constructed, but not for the portion of 47. I'm probably behind. It sounds like a good idea for whenever we're constructing a line along a corridor to have that planning work together. Can you give me a little insight on that?
Yes, Councilmember Chair
Can you,
Chambliss.
I'm sorry, I'd like to
Thank you.
repeat the
sure.
question in case anyone did not hear. I believe that the question is, why are we not coordinating 47 and 65 together? If you could explain a little bit more about the order, that would be very helpful.
Yes, Chair Chambliss, Councilmember, that's a great question. So the MnDOT-led planning study that I mentioned, it narrowed down the alternatives to a very small set of alternatives for Trunk Highway 65. So that really led to a situation where it made a lot of sense to incorporate the Trunk Highway 65 design into the F-Line project. That MnDOT study left a larger number of alternatives on the table for Trunk Highway 47. So both agencies felt it was more appropriate for MnDOT to hold its own contract for Highway 47 design. But that being said, there will still be a significant amount of coordination between the F-Line project at Metro Transit and the MnDOT-led design process for Trunk Highway 47.
The timing of the alternatives.
Timing and
Thank you.
alternatives. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion points? Seeing no further questions, I would like to entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-132, same week.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Vento,
Second.
seconded by Councilmember Morales. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay, that motion carries. So next we'll move on to the second portion of the action. 2023-125, same week, Metro F-Line Engineering and Construction Administrative Services Contract. 22P400, And we'll take the presentation, Mr. Alarcon.
Thank you, Chair Chambliss. Committee members, business item 2023-125, same week, would authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 22P400 with Kimley Horn and Associates, Inc. for engineering and construction administration services for the Metro F-Line project and the associated MnDOT roadway improvements in an amount not to exceed $17,382,828. And like the previous item, a same week action is being requested for timely execution of this contract and advancement of F-Line design activities. So as the F-Line project advances from planning to engineering, Metro Transit requires a consultant to provide engineering and construction administration services for the F-Line project and the associated MnDOT improvements discussed earlier. A request for proposals for this contract was issued on January 10th, 2023. There were 21 registered plan holders for this project, and the council received 2 proposals. An evaluation panel and technical advisory group representing council staff and our local agency partners ranked and selected the most technically qualified proposer, recommending Kimley Horn as the most technically qualified. The next step was that costing data of the recommended proposer was reviewed by a Metro Transit negotiation panel that negotiated pricing and determined that the final negotiated costs with Kimley Horn to be fair and reasonable, and recommended Kimley Horn's proposal as the most advantageous to the council. As part of this process, the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity set a disadvantaged business enterprise goal of 16% for this contract, and they have determined that Kimley Horn has met the DBE requirements for this contract. So in closing, business item 2023-125, same week, would authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 22P400 with Kimley Horn and Associates, Inc. for engineering and construction administration services for the Metro F-Line project and associated roadway improvements in the amount not to exceed $17,382,828.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions? Councilmember Cameron.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first is, to what extent was MnDOT involved in the contracting process or the selection of the contractor?
Yes, thank you for that question. The Minnesota Department of Transportation was involved. So there was a 2-part evaluation process. There was the proposal evaluation and then the negotiation. MnDOT was involved in both of those steps as a technical advisor, both because they're an overall stakeholder in the F-Line project, and then as part of that cost negotiation, because now there'll be a partial funder of the contract, they were also part of those negotiation conversations.
Okay. And my second question is around the 17 million. How does the 2.4 fit into that? Where is the remaining funding? What is that accounting for?
Yes, of that, so it's approximately a $17.4 million contract. Of that, about $2.4 million is the MnDOT share, and the remaining $15 million is the baseline F-Line consulting services that we need for purely the Metro Transit project.
Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
Wonderful. What other lines, have we used Kimley Horn on any of the other lines that have already been constructed or are in the process?
Yes, Madam Chair, committee members, Kimley Horn is the design contractor for the B-Line project that's currently both in construction and design.
Done? More? Okay,
All done.
great. Good questions. Thank you so much. Any other questions? No questions? I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the item 2023-125, same week.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Morales, seconded by Councilmember Cameron. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That motion carries. Next, we have business item 2023-137. It is the Metro Blue Line Extension Phase 2 ESA, and we have Chris Beckwith and Neha Domley here to present, and also Nick Thomas.
Madam Chair, council members, thank you. I'm going to lead in this business item before we get into it, just to set a little context. Again, Nick Thompson, Deputy General Manager, Capital Projects. So for the Blue Line extension in April this year, we came before the council requesting approval of 3 contracts that we called the engineering contracts for the engineering of the project, risk management, project management of the project. And during that time, utilizing the Transitway Advancement Policy, we talked about a lot of the risks with the project and the fact that we were currently negotiating with our funding partner, Hennepin County, how we would govern the project moving forward, and how we would work with our partners to manage the project over the life of the project. And at that time, the council, we were not done with the negotiations with Hennepin County. We are negotiating what we call a capital grant agreement. That's really the agreement between our 2 parties about how we manage funding and governance and change orders and all kinds of decisions on the project. And we asked the council to approve the engineering contracts and asked for what we said, a limited notice to proceed, which gave us authority to continue those contracts, execute those contracts for a given time while we were given time to negotiate the capital grant agreement, because you had indicated to us that you wanted that capital grant agreement completed before we went too far on the project. And that's relevant for this business item is because we're still negotiating that capital grant agreement. We're getting very close. And so I thought that you may have questions about whether we should execute essentially another agreement to continue the project forward. And you'll hear a recommendation that we will tonight. But this is very similar in that we now are at a point where we need to come to agreement with the county on that capital grant agreement by August, because that's all the authority we have with them. And so the timing of this action tonight is really anticipating that we will reach conclusion of the capital grant agreement that will allow this item to go forward. So I just wanted to kind of introduce that topic in that the capital grant agreement is still processing. You can have confidence in approving this action tonight because we will get that other action before you, hopefully shortly, before this even contract would be executed. So this is very similar in that we still need to complete that agreement, and we're working hard on that, and we'll bring that capital grant agreement before this committee when it's ready to be signed and to keep the project moving forward. So that's just kind of set the context for this business item, similar to where we were back in April with you for those engineering contracts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That background information is very helpful. So to present, we have Chris Beckwith and Neha Domley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to introduce to you Neha Domley, who is our Environmental Compliance Lead at the Blue Line Project Office. She's been with us 11 months and had 6 years of prior environmental experience in the private sector before coming to the Blue Line project. And she just got her professional engineering license. So I wanted to introduce Neha to you, and then I'll be here to answer any questions. And Neha can also walk through why the timing of this particular contract award is important for the project.
Madam Chair, council members, as Chris introduced me, I am Neha Domley, Environmental Compliance Lead for the Blue Line Extension Project. My pronouns are she, her, and you can call me Neha. So right now we are in the supplemental environmental impact statement phase right now. And under that, we need to complete the phase 1 environmental site assessment and phase 2 environmental site assessment, out of which phase 1 ESA was completed in winter of 2022. Phase 2, with this contract, we are trying to move forward the phase 2 ESA work. The RFP was issued in January of 2023. We received 5 proposals that totaled, including 22 subcontractors, 13 of which were DBEs or WBEs. This was a Brooks Act evaluation, so the evaluation panel mostly selected the top contender based on the technical qualifications and alignment with the scope that was requested in the RFP, and their prior experience, how closely they worked on similar other projects. Evaluation panel identified Braun Enertech to be the top contender. After that, we received a cost proposal from them. After the negotiations were completed, the final proposal, cost proposal, was received in June 2023 in the amount of $616,504. The DBE goals set by the council was 20%. The contractor came in at 25%. They committed to that number. And the services that they would be providing is digging, trenching, sample collection, sample analysis, remediation action plan, and draft and final phase 2 ESA report. There are a couple of things I really wanted to point out here. One is the phase 2 ESA itself is the risk managing step, because with the phase 2, we are basically digging into the ground, collecting samples, and figuring out what we are going to come across with or have some idea of what we are going to get into. So this phase 2 work is really important, and it might manage risk as a risk step. And another thing I wanted to point out is this is a very time-bound task, because it introduces delays if it is further delayed in the winter because ground freezes at that time. So there is a possibility of delays due to the cold conditions. And that is why it is important to get the field work done before the start of the winter. So seeking your support in keeping advancing environmental work with the phase 2 ESA here. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions with this part of the presentation? Okay, go ahead. One question from Councilmember Delcar.
Thank you. Could I ask, just for a clarification, is the phase 1, phase 2 environmental assessment on the new routes for both alternatives that Blue Line is considering, or have we picked a preferred route?
Madam Chair, council members, yes, it is for all the options on the table. The phase 1, phase 2 are for every alignment and option we are considering right now.
And how long will the phase 2 EIS state process would be?
The contract execution, so the contract ending would be in December 2024, but the field work portion of that would be approximately 2 months. And after that, the report takes a little bit of time to come in with us.
I keep going with the questions. Thank you. And so if it takes 2 months for the process and the report to come back, in terms of timeline, when do you need a route picked to when the assessments are done to when do you start the engineering process for the project?
This, as I said before, it is for all the options currently under consideration. So once we know how what is the contamination level and what is on the ground, that is all the report that we need for the phase 2 portion. The further work of during the construction phase, so taking out soil and constructing on that, all that comes in the construction phase. The phase 2 is just for analysis and finding out how it's laid out.
Is the analysis for the EIS used to select the routes at all, or does it influence in route selection at all?
I could jump in on that, Madam Chair, and council members. So actually, as Neha said, we'll be studying all of the routes. So even when we choose a preferred alternative, we will still have an analysis of all of the routes. And this, among many other technical inputs, are used as well as public input to make a final recommendation. So regardless of whether we choose a preferred alternative in the next couple of months here, we'll still do the analysis on all of the alternatives we've identified in the supplemental draft EIS.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dolkar. I think I understand the reason for the questions because there could be some findings from the environmental analysis, and the findings could have a significant impact on the choice or the alternative selected. That's probably why you're asking those questions, and I think the answers were very helpful. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, you can continue.
So I think we're ready for the, Neha, do you want to read the proposed action?
Yes. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the Phase 2 Environmental Site Assessment, or ESA, contract 22P366 with Braun Intertech for consultant services for the Metro Blue Line Light Rail Transit Extension, BLRT project, in an amount not to exceed $616,504.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-137.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Morales,
Second?
seconded by Councilmember Dolkar. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay, that motion carries. Thank you so much for the presentation and information. Hi. Next, we have business item 2023-143, Northstar Corridor Funding Agreement with the State of Minnesota Department of Transportation, Resolution 2023-6, and we have Ed Petrie here to present.
Yes, thank you, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance, Metro Transit. I'm here to present business item 2023-143. This is the Northstar Corridor Funding Agreement with the State of Minnesota, or MnDOT, and the accompanying Resolution 2023-6. The proposed action this evening is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to, one, enter into an agreement with the State of Minnesota Department of Transportation, MnDOT, for calendar year 2024 to provide funding for public commuter rail service in Sherburne County, Minnesota for an amount up to $1.7 million per year. And then number two, execute the attached resolution of the governing body from the Metropolitan Council to enter into an agreement with the State of Minnesota Department of Transportation for calendar year 2024. The item that I'm presenting this evening is a standard application process that we go through with MnDOT every year. This is so I can formally apply for the grant with MnDOT, which is due by July 31st of 2023. It would be for the 2024 grant cycle. After it is applied for with MnDOT, MnDOT goes through a review process. They'll ask questions back and forth. I will answer the questions with their plan then ready to have the contract ready for execution by October 15th. We will then execute it, then have it ready, I believe, fully executed by December 15th of 2023 for calendar year 2024. So once again, this would be for MnDOT's 8.05% subsidy of Northstar Commuter Rail in Sherburne County, Minnesota. And with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? One question by Councilmember Cameron.
Yes, I just wanted some clarification. So this is to fund an existing, is this renewing an existing agreement, or is this a new relationship that we're entering into?
Madam Chair, committee members, good question. This is with MnDOT, it is annual grant agreements. Okay. So this would be establishing, we right now have a 2023 grant agreement with MnDOT. This would be now setting up and applying for the 2024 grant agreement.
Any other questions? Seeing no other questions, I would like to entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-143.
So moved.
The motion moved by Councilmember Cameron. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Diego Morales. And hearing the second, is there any other discussion? No further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay, that motion carries. Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
presentation, Mr. Petrie.
Thank you.
Next, we have business item 2023-149, University of Minnesota Universal Transit Pass for staff and faculty. And again, we have Mr. Ed Petrie and Lisa Anderson here to present.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Ed Petrie, once again, Director of Metro Transit, Director of Finance. I wanted to be here to present Lisa Anderson. She's new to presentations here at the committee. She's our Manager of Revenue Operations. Lisa's been working very, very hard with the University of Minnesota on a universal pass with the Metro Pass agreement with the University of Minnesota. And I just wanted to introduce Lisa and turn it over to her.
Thank you, Ed, and Madam Chambliss, and committee members. Here, as Ed has said, business item 23-149. The proposed action is to authorize the regional administrator to execute a 2-year agreement with the University of Minnesota for the Universal Metro Pass with the University of Minnesota for staff and faculty for the period of August 1st, 2023 to July 31st, 2025, with an option to extend 1 additional year from August 1st, 2025 to July 31st, 2026. Some background: University of Minnesota staff and faculty have utilized the MetroPass program for many years and has provided the University of Minnesota and Metro Transit an option to drive growth at this key institution in the Twin Cities. University of Minnesota employees and faculty took 176,000 rides using MetroPass in 2022 and generated about $594,000 in revenues. With the Universal Pass program, the university will provide a transit pass to all eligible staff and faculty. This program will generate $1.7 million in revenues the first year and $2 million in revenues the second year of this contract. Approval of the agreement with the University of Minnesota will allow Metro Transit to provide affordable, quality transit service to employees and faculty of the University of Minnesota. This agreement, in cooperation with the University of Minnesota, positions Metro Transit to once again be an important transportation provider for all University of Minnesota staff and faculty. This agreement with the University of Minnesota provides a transit option for all employees, faculty. The Universal Pass program provides an excellent transit option for employees at the University of Minnesota who otherwise might not be able to afford to drive or park at the university campus. Funding for these fare products will be financed directly by the University of Minnesota, paid directly to Metro Transit. The past revenues generated by the University of Minnesota contract have been included in the 2023 and future Metro Transit operating budget. This is a revenue contract for the Metropolitan Council. Any questions? I'm open for questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Vento.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm curious, are there other higher ed institutions or K-12 education institutions that have expressed a desire to do something similar? I'm thinking like Augsburg, community colleges, St. Paul College, any number of them.
Yes, Chair Chambliss and the committee members. Yes, there are. We do have Augsburg University. We've had some other. We had some smaller, Anoka Tech, Anoka Ramsey. We also have Normandale. So those ones are providing this similar pass program.
Great. And then as far as, excuse me, Madam Chair, as far as K-12, I know Minneapolis, we've got an arrangement with Minneapolis. Are there any others?
Yes, matter of fact, there are. We have approximately, besides Minneapolis Public Schools, which consists of about 11 high schools, we also have additional 38 other high schools in the region that do participate in the Student Pass program.
Great, thank you.
Good questions. Councilmember Cameron.
So I have 2 questions. One prompted by Councilmember Vento's question, and that is, are we also extending it to staff and faculty in K through 12, or staff and support personnel? in the K through 12 system, because that would be another opportunity within those districts that we're already servicing.
Council Cameron, yes. I do believe that we have not had any expressed interest yet from any organization in the school districts for their staff and faculty, but this will open up, I believe, some opportunity for those type of negotiations.
Yeah, I think this is wonderful, and particularly some of these employer-based programs. I know that we are seeing a decline in commuter ridership, and this is an opportunity to build back some of that customer base by entering into these partnerships with employers. So I'm really excited to see this. The other question I had is that, there's quite a few different unions within the faculty and staff at the university, and so to what extent were they involved in these negotiations? Is it, I'll stop there.
Yes, a matter of fact, the university actually did last year take the time to actually negotiate this because they are offering this as a benefit to their staff and faculty and had to negotiate those terms as well. So it took a little bit extra time to get this program rolled out.
Thank you for those questions. Any other questions? Councilmember Carter.
Yeah, I'm just kind of brought me back to when I was a student. We had student passes. Is there a move to try to include student passes in that same way? Or not?
Councilmember Carter, yes, as a matter of fact, last year we actually began the program for the Universal Transit Pass for the students there. So they are already receiving that benefit.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that that's automatically done up front when they get their student fees paid. I'm correct? Yep. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If there are no further questions, thank you for that presentation. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-149. It's been moved by Councilmember Cameron and seconded by Councilmember Tony Carter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. That motion carries. Thank you. I'm assuming there were no further discussion. I did miss that part, but thank you. Next, we have our final business item, 2023-150, Title 6 Analysis for Fare Elimination Pilot. And we have Dennis Dworshak and Andrea Keepy here to present. Thank you.
Madam Chair, council members, we're here to follow up on the Transit Fare Elimination Pilot Program. Last month, we announced that we were doing a Title VI analysis on this program, and we received the results back of this program, and Andrea is going to present what we found.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Good evening. Spoiler alert, we passed, so I'll just get that out of the way. I'm also prepared to describe a little bit about what Title VI analysis is and how we did the study. And then you will have the opportunity to approve or not approve it. The transit fare elimination was passed by the legislature recently, and the council elected to go with a fare elimination option, which we've already adopted on July 1st. Under federal requirements passed by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and in the 90s under President Clinton by executive order, we're required to analyze any permanent fare change to see if it has disproportionate impact on people with lower incomes or disproportionate burden on people based on race, color, or national origin. We did actually contract to do that study, and because we reduced the fares completely by there was no disparate impact. So we contracted with SRF to do that work, and that built on the work of previous study on a proposed fare change. That was completed at the end of last month. It was for the two routes, 62 and 32 in the East and West Metro. And we did examine that in some detail. But of course, when you multiply everything by 0, it becomes 0. And so all of the different groups have exactly the same 0 fare. So that is the result of the fare of the analysis. Now, our proposed action would be that the Metropolitan Council approve the Title VI fare equity analysis for the free fares on routes number 62 and 32 to be used for the transit fare elimination pilot program from July 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions? Councilmember Delcar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question on Route 32 and 62. I was going to look them up. Are they both in the environmental justice zones as defined by the federal government?
I do not know the answer to that question, Madam Chair, Commissioners.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Does not look like I have any other questions. Is there additional information to present? Okay.
I think that the actual results of the report itself were attached in your packet. So if you have the desire to read it.
Well, thank you. I saw, I believe it was on CNN, talking about fare elimination programs at various states. So it's very interesting and exciting to be able to connect our work to the work of other states. So if there are no additional questions or comments, I would like to entertain a motion to approve business item, our final item, 2023-150.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Morales. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Carter. Any discussion? With no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm looking forward to seeing how this pilot program proceeds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners.
Next, we have, before we move on to our information items, we need to decide what can go to consent to council. The same week items can go non-consent, but we're recommending that the following items go consent if council members are okay with that. Number 1, 2, 7, and 9. Any objections? Okay, those items will go on consent. Thank you. Moving on, we have information items. First is an update on a ridership report. And we have John Harper presenting along with Joey Reed.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. I am John Harper. I'm the manager of contracted services in MTS. And with me today is Joey Reed. He is a principal data scientist in strategic initiatives at Metro Transit. We're here today to provide you a ridership report, and this is an ongoing quarterly report that is done. I've been doing this probably 10 years. Various Metro Transit folks have been here as well, and this is our first time doing this presentation together, so be gentle. But we do this, like I say, this report quarterly, and we go over some summary information. We then drill down on some aspect of ridership analysis. And so, we get the high level, which is my part of the presentation, and the fun look into the why of the ridership is really what strategic initiatives is all about. So we'll move forward here in the presentation today. And typically, we do this quarterly. We're doing it, the presentation this year in 3 4-month chunks. And so it isn't quite quarterly, but nearly so. The news is good. It continues to be good and has been for quite a while. We continue to increase our ridership overall as we continue to recover from the pandemic. And ridership is up, as this graph shows overall. 2023 is up from 2022. to drill down a little bit into what modes and types of services drive our ridership, nearly half of our ridership is provided with local bus. Those routes that are making frequent stops on around the core of the metro, and about a quarter of our ridership, or about a third of our ridership then, is also on the light rail lines. And you can see here a growing trend, the green section, a growing trend of our ridership is the BRT, the arterial BRTs primarily, and that is the green. And Jody will go into that a little bit about the increasing proportion of our service operated with the arterial BRT. So that gives you a sense of the mode and types of service that drive the ridership across the Met Council. This shows you the year-over-year comparison for the first 4 months of the year, comparing 2023 to 2022. And as you saw in that first graph, the ridership is up in all the different modes and types of services. The Transit Link and Vanpool programs have very large increases. Those are small programs within the council, so a modest change of ridership can drive those percentages up. But we're doing well overall. All of our different modes and types of services are up. It's always good to have that kind of presentation. And bus is a mode that has a variety of different types of service under it. And this breaks that down between the local, the express, and the bus rapid transit. And you can see here that bus rapid transit is very much increasing, about 150% increase in 2023 over 2022. And as I turn this presentation here over to Joey, he will drill down into that and talk about why that number is so outstanding. So that is the overall picture. We're up in all modes, all types of services. We continue to climb the hill in ridership as we recover from the pandemic hit that we had a couple, 3 years ago now. It's always hard to keep track of how long ago that was, but we are evolving and increasing our ridership overall. So I'll turn it over to Joey to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So D-line opening is experiencing solid growth in both the other BRT routes and our local routes. On that previous slide John showed, BRT is up 143%, and local is something around 3%. A lot of that growth in BRT is because Route 5 riders are riding D-line. So if we look at Route 5 and D-line together, we see still really impressive 80% growth in that corridor since the D-line opened. The BRT service we provide is clearly a desirable service. The speed, the reliability, the frequency, and the span are all things our customers love about that service. So we're really excited to see that growth, and that growth is being complemented by both growth in local service and the other BRT service we provide. As my predecessor used to say, transit use is when supply meets demand. So this is a bit of a recipe for ridership here that we kind of always refer to. I'll dig into that recipe a little bit. You can think about making pancakes. You usually mix the dry ingredients first and the wet ingredients and combine them together. We're doing the same thing with ridership in a sense. So people have to make a decision to ride, and that's based on where people live, where jobs are, how easy it is to get around once you get to the destination or from your home, how available vehicles are in your household, how direct the routing is between your destinations, and how far apart they are. Those are sort of the core factors of the built environment in some ways. And that combines with the opportunities we provide. So these include the types of routes we provide. Is that express, local service, BRT? What's the network connectivity? How can you connect from one route to another? The frequency of service, the span of service, both the hours of the day, how late into the day can be really critical, as well as the days of week. We know that both evening and ridership and Saturday ridership, for example, have grown more than weekday commute times, for example. And then the speed and reliability of the service we provide. If we do not provide reliable service, people do not want to ride. So all of those factors, well, some of those factors are addressed in the transit market areas. The transit market areas are intended to guide how we plan our service and evaluate our service. So they're a combination of population and job density, intersection density, and vehicle availability. I'm going to step through each of these to give you a sense, a little more intuition about how these transit market areas come about and what the future of them is. So going through a few maps here. On each of these maps, you can sort of see the geography of the region with the downtowns, both Minneapolis and St. Paul, standing out. On the left is the population density, so yellow indicates the highest population densities. And this map, population is also the most significant contributor to the transit market area determinant, with jobs being the second most important contributor. Population density tends to be very concentrated in the core cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, whereas job density is a little more dispersed. The absolute highest densities are in the downtowns, but there's considerable density surrounding the core cities. And so a very different pattern you can see between population and jobs. We use intersection density on the left here to as a sort of a substitute for aspects of the built environment and walkability that make it attractive to be a pedestrian and ride transit. So the intersection density tends to follow the same pattern as population density, although there are places with very dense intersections that actually don't have very many people, and vice versa. A vehicle deficit is intended to represent the availability of cars and relative to the population who could drive. So the higher the vehicle deficit, the less likely you are to be able to use a car for your transportation needs. The vehicle deficit, again, is concentrated where the population tends to be concentrated in the core cities. We combine those four factors to create this transit market index, which is sort of like a number that, again, gets broken down into transit market areas. We have 5 transit market areas, starting with 1 as being the highest transit market index and the highest propensity to ride transit. So these, where the transit market index is really high, is where you're most likely to ride transit, and that turns into the transit market area 1. And then areas with lower transit market indices are lower transit market areas. On the right is the sort of map that shows those raw transit market areas. Those then get sort of merged together and form concentric rings to create the, I'll step back a second, give you that map. Oh boy. So we have sort of concentric rings of transit market areas, and this is what's in our policy guide, the transportation policy plan. So I know that's a lot to digest, but as a quick review of how the built environment contributes to what we know about ridership and the propensity to ride when we consider planning. Related to that is, of course, the ridership that comes out of these things. So looking at the number of boardings in each of these transit market areas over the last 2 years through April, we can see really solid growth in transit market areas 1 and 2. That's over 20% growth ridership in both those transit markets, and fairly minimal growth in the remaining markets. And this ridership growth has happened in a time when we've had very little new service and some small service cuts as well. So key takeaways, the D-line ridership growth is complemented by growth in other BRT routes and local routes that don't show up when you look at D-line mixed in with all the others. So we're happy about that. The transit market areas are going to be updated with the transportation policy plan updates, and that updating process is now in progress. And then we see really large ridership growth over this last year in transit market areas 1 and 2. For 2023, the remainder of the year, service frequency and span improvements are really going to be limited by our ability to hire operators. So as we hire operators, we can add service. And Network Now is the planning process we're using at Metro Transit to determine how to use those operators, how to expand service over the coming 5 years. And we will continue to design and evaluate service based on those transit market areas and the updates to the transit market areas. Thank you.
Thank you for that, those presentations. It's very interesting. I like digging into the analysis and why and how we make decisions. This is very helpful background information for that. Any questions of council members? One question, Councilmember Dolkart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How does the 2023 transit ridership compare to pre-COVID?
I can answer that, Madam Chair and committee members. As a matter of fact, we put together the first 4 months of 2019 and the first 4 months of 2023. And in 2019, all services council-wide, both at Metro Transit and at MTS, the ridership was just over 26 million rides for that 4-month period. In 2023, the ridership is approximately 15 million. So that's about 60% of pre-COVID.
Okay, thank you.
I can break that down further if you're more interested in by route type, or if that's enough.
No, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Councilmember Cameron.
That was going to be my follow-up question, so I am interested.
Terrific, yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. A local bus is down about 50% compared to pre-COVID. Similar to light rail, actually. And then BRT up 314%, which of course includes that shift from Route 5 into BRT. Express, both Express and Northstar are down about 88% compared to 2019.
Councilmember Tony Carter.
Thank you. It's a very insightful presentation. I particularly enjoyed the slide that talks about the recipe, the ridership recipe. And as we observe the decline in ridership and are building back now, I wonder if there are, and I know there are because you went through this so very quickly, but there must be metrics and ways in which you assess, particularly the internal controls, those that we have some influence over, to determine how, as we look at ridership increasing again, we have levers that we can actually adjust. And I wonder if you will be bringing to us any analysis of those levers. You know, of course, the examples of increasing the frequency of routes or hours, things of that sort could be that kind of lever. And you have, I was looking back, but haven't found the exact slide. You have a number on the opportunity we provide side, which I consider to be those levers. Are you doing anything with this in terms of visioning how we might impact that build back?
Yeah. Madam Chair, council members, the Network Now process is really diving deep into a lot of those levers. And, you know, as we hire more operators, should we invest more in span, so providing more evening service or more Saturday and Sunday service? Should we invest more in frequency? Should we invest more in maybe routes providing coverage in other areas but at low frequency? These are all questions that the Network Now process is attempting to answer in the near future.
So I really need to get to know Network Now.
Now is going to be the answer.
Now. Okay.
Network, yeah, yes, there.
We're getting there, right?
Yes. Thank you for that, Councilmember Tyrone Carter.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you did a great job on your projections, and I was wondering, based on a projected ridership growth, what is the projected shortfall in terms of drivers? And based on your current rate of income in drivers?
Right. Yeah, council members, thank you. We don't have exact projections on operator hiring at this time. I think with the hiring that we've seen lately, we probably still need more in order to open the transit ways and BRT routes that we have planned. So we remain hopeful that we can hire them and the additional drivers that we want to expand span and frequency.
Any other questions?
And Madam Chair, if I may, back to a previous question about the modes, the types of service having different responses. I do want to comment that our Metro Mobility service, which is our ADA service for the folks with disabilities, that is at over 90% of pre-COVID. And so, as a matter of fact, just earlier today, I was having a conversation with someone about, the differences in the makeup of the Metro Mobility clientele versus our other services. And it really does go to show that the persons with disabilities are really reliant upon transit. I think a lot of others, potentially purchased vehicles, found other ways to not come back to transit in some instances. And I think the options are much more limited for people who use our Metro Mobility service, and you can see that in the return being about 90%. And most of what has not come back at this point is day services, folks that go to daily, almost like school bus service that we have. So people are going to day support. And that is down because hiring for those day support positions by the nonprofits and those others is not there. And so people are, I don't know what they're doing, but they're not going to those day support. But our demand ridership is really almost back to pre-COVID. And so it just goes to show it really is a matter of looking at the different routes, the different route types, different service types to see that the response is different. And we have to look into that as we go through Network Now and see where we can get the best benefit for the service that we return.
Thank you for that question. I thought I might have seen another hand up, maybe. No? Okay, then I have a question. In March, we had a presentation on Network Now, and I've often asked, how we can get additional service in areas that does not have the current demand or necessarily even the dependency, I guess I should say the folks that do not have access to car vehicles. There are folks in the outside of the core area, which you talked about, that have transit needs that have a different formula than our standard formula, which I think is why we are taking a look at one of the reasons why we're taking a look at Network Now, from my understanding. And I was very curious about the transit market index. I believe this is the first time I've actually seen it presented this way. So that was very helpful information in terms of how it guides design and services. But I'm really interested in the 1 year time that we are doing the research and now finding that, a lot of the demand has come back in those core areas. How are we prioritizing the different index components, like, the population density, the job density, intersection and vehicle? I know there are some low frequency areas that may be considered with Network Now, which gives us another opportunity to look at those areas and the differences that they have as compared to the core areas. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Madam Chair, council members, if if I understand, there's sort of two parts to your question. One is how do those components that make up the transit market areas get chosen and weighted against each other? And that was part of an earlier research project, I think from 2014. So we're in the process of updating that, and that requires doing some statistical modeling, getting into the weeds, looking at a number of different factors. The idea is that those things were good predictors of ridership at that time, and one of the things we're doing is looking to see are they still good predictors of ridership or not, given the changes over the last 4 years. So that's something that we're working on right now. That will be done by the end of this year as part of the TPP updates. The second part of your question was, how do we balance the needs in other areas that aren't really being met currently? And my answer for that is that is definitely part of Network Now. I don't have an answer. That's one of the really difficult trade-offs with transit planning, is that you have to sort of choose. You have a limited number of drivers, a limited number of vehicles, a limited budget. How do you place them in one place or another? And that is what the Network Now project will help guide us through.
And Madam Chair, if I can expand upon that just a little bit. Within Network Now and within planning, it really is a values question, as Joey was just talking about. And we are going out and doing outreach to ask people in the community, within the agency, in a variety of places, to ask them within their values about productivity versus what we would call coverage. So those routes that are in the core, in the high ridership type areas versus those in the areas that might be needed by some people, but might not drive the same ridership. And we, like I say, we're going out and doing, taking input on that to find out where the, what the community wants as far as the relationship between those. And that informs the planning process. If we had lots of money and we certainly are doing all right with funding at this point, and had unlimited drivers and unlimited vehicles, we would be out there. We could cover the whole region, but we do have to make those judgments, and we try to find the right kind of service and the right kind of frequency and so on the routes that we provide.
Thank you. Yes, Leslie.
Chair Chambliss, committee members, just to build on the answers from Mr. Reed and Mr. Harper. It's a planning process, but it's also a policy-making process. And we are at a point where we're looking at when we next bring Network Now back to you to update you on the results of the engagement that happened in the first round. And just want to note that there's policy decisions to be made in these investments too. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Leslie. I think that's really helpful to have this information, so as we are in the position to make decisions as policymakers, we understand what our options are, what we've done in the past, and what we might be able to be innovative going forward. So thanks for adding that. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We have another information item that's updating us on the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. And I see that Cole Henniker is walking up.
Yes. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Cole Henniker, use he, him pronouns, and I am the manager of multimodal planning in MTS and the project manager for the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan development. So I'm here today to give you an update and a pretty pivotal point in the process of the TPP development. And actually, your last discussion is going to dovetail very nicely into this one, because it's all about priorities and what we're hoping to achieve with the 2050 TPP as a region. And so a little bit of this is going to be referring back to some slides you heard at the Committee of the Whole a few weeks ago when Michael Larson was presenting on the vision. And that's really just to give you context, because we're actually taking that vision a step further in the TPP already with draft objectives. So the conversation that was had at Committee of the Whole talked about regional goals. And for the first time since I've been at the council, what you're hearing is that we're going to have goals for all of the system plans that are consistent so that all the system plans are working towards the same outcomes. Now, the difference is that each of the system plans wants to talk about those outcomes in their own terms. So we have objectives to be able to do that. So objectives in the TPP are going to state, what do we mean when we say we want to have an equitable and inclusive region? What does that mean for transportation in particular? And so today we're going to focus primarily on how we've drafted objectives for the 2050 TPP, the engagement that we did to get there, and what it means moving forward, and then including some questions specifically to work with you all and with our partners on, because we're going to be presenting this at a few committees this month. There we go. So this is just a reminder slide. You saw this at the Committee of the Whole a few weeks ago, that we had originally started with these regional vision statements. We're breaking them up into two separate pieces, one being a vision narrative and one being those cross-cutting goals for all of the system plans in the regional development guide. And so this is ultimately what was presented to you a few weeks ago. Again, this is the draft status. I understand you guys are probably going to continue to talk about these statements moving forward, but this is what we were working with going into this presentation. So these are just reminder slides about what you've seen previously. Just noting that we do have those 5 goals, and that third one in the middle there was a new one added, and that's really important, you'll see, when we start talking about transportation objectives, because we have a lot to say about that particular goal, which is great. And what does that relationship really look like? Well, objectives are really meant to be things that are achievable, that help us advance goals. So they should state things that we can understand which direction we want it to be going. We might have some statements about where we're at now versus where we want to be. Also, they should be measurable and realistic. So, we're not saying in these instances that we want to solve world peace. We might have a more interim statement that says we want to advance peace in, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more of an achievable, time-bound statement about that particular outcome. So you'll notice the language between the goal statements and the objective statements are going to have that different tone and feel to them. We've done a lot over the last couple of months to work on these statements, and I just wanted to note one really important thing, that we drafted transportation-specific goal statements a couple of months ago, not even knowing if we were going to have shared goals across the regional development guide. So that conversation and development happened after we had started our engagement. So with that being said, we did take a lot of the feedback that we got, and we still tried to incorporate it. And we just considered all of the statements that we put out to be potential objective statements rather than goals. And then we had to do the work internally at MTS of repositioning all of our objectives under the goals that are cross-cutting for the system. So the whole point of that is to say this is very dynamic, and it's happening pretty real time for both us as staff and for our partners. And so, again, this is very much so a draft state of where we're at, and we're definitely open to feedback. But we are, as I think we're the first group to actually present objectives to you all that nest under those regional development goals. So, as I said, we did a lot of engagement. We actually did 2, and I've talked about this with you all. I was at a Committee of the Whole actually in April, and I talked about the phase 1 engagement and all of the feedback we heard from listening sessions with our partners. We did a lot of listening during that phase 1, different groups, both government and non-government community members. And we heard some different themes between those groups too. And that was influential in how we decided to draft the goals and objectives that we have. Phase 2 is the most recent thing that we did. It was a little bit more quantitative in focus. We put out draft statements. All of the draft statements are actually in the attachment number 2, the Word document, if you want to see what we did put out for review. And we had people rank them both individually as statements and into topical themed areas, and we had them prioritize them. So to get at that concept of we can't be everything to everyone. We can't say we want to provide a lot of transit service in the urban core and in the suburbs, because there's always trade-offs with resources. We wanted to get a sense for what was the most important things to everyone across the region to the greatest extent possible. And that was what that phase 2 did. So this is just a reminder from phase 1 about some of our themes, starting with the one at the top that we currently have too many priorities. So we need to be strategic in our approach, and you will see that. You're going to see some things that you might have said, why isn't this a priority? And it's because we really do feel like we need to have a strategic plan and not just a plan that tries to achieve everything. We heard that safety was a top priority, and that came out in our phase 2 as well. I'm not going to read the rest of these themes because they're more of a reminder for you all, but just note that some of these themes were very influential in how we came to our draft objectives. So as I said, the phase 2 engagement, and this again was with all of the same partners that we engaged with in phase 1, were given an opportunity. So it includes both government entities like cities and counties, and also includes community groups. Particularly, we focused on equity relationships that we have at the council. We asked participants to rank these 11 topics by priority for investment in transportation. And you can see the ranking would be, 1 being the most important and the bottom 8.5 being the least important. You can see that safety and security is by far what people think we should be investing the most in to achieve as an outcome. We did also hear a lot about things that we see reflective of the council's current draft of the Regional Development Guide goals. So those topics like equity, climate mitigation, and public health definitely came out, along with resilience, came out towards the top. There's that grouping kind of in the middle, a multimodal opportunity, repair, replace, modernize, and travel time, reliability, and affordability there. I think what we're hearing from people is they're important, but maybe they should be secondary considerations when we're thinking about investing in transportation. And then there's a number of topics that are towards the bottom, and they're very, very clearly towards the bottom. I want to caveat the land use one in that I think land use, a lot of the comments there were about this is a land use policy topic, not transportation. So we do have a separate land use policy in the Regional Development Guide, and we're going to forward all of those comments to CD to try to consider some of those things when they're developing that. But the other topics like natural systems and competitive economy were not viewed as being as important of a priority.
Councilmember Dokar, do you have a question?
Yeah, could I ask a question related to the ranking for safety and security? Would you mind contextualizing? Is that new based on the safety concerns people have on transit, or is this fairly common when we have done this in the past?
Thank you for that question. That's a good question. Madam Chair and council members, safety and security certainly is contextually important right now. Not just on the transit system, but our deaths and serious injuries on the roadway system have been going up, trending upward since COVID started. And so it's something that is trending in the wrong direction. And I think that's heavily influencing why people are saying it is a high priority right now. What I would say is historically, everyone has said safety and security is important. They've never said it's the number one investment category because people just assumed we were doing it well because the trends were all kind of always going down. And so I think the new reality is the trends are going in the wrong direction and people are now saying it is the most important thing we should be focusing on to try to right that trend.
Was there a difference in mentioning whether it was safety related to the death ranked higher versus safety on transit operating and bus stops?
We did have some specific statements under these themes that people were reacting to, and I can tell you that all of them ranked high. So whether it was about reducing deaths or whether it was about people feeling safe and welcome, all of them ranked high from our participants as being important, at least in this exercise.
Thank you. That seems just very, because everything else, you can kind of see they line up next to each other. It's just safety and security really popped up, so thank you.
Councilmember Bento?
Under the safety and security, would that also include pedestrian and bike safety?
Yes.
I figured it did, so.
Yep, and I would also just note, we have a report that we're producing to summarize all this information, and we'll certainly share it with you all when we have it available. That does include breakdowns. We do have like breakdowns by responses from policymakers versus staff from agencies. We have breakdowns by urban core versus suburban and rural. And I know a number of you actually filled this survey out, so we even have breakdowns by council members versus non-council members. So we can certainly provide any detail that you all would like to see about how different groups ranked these categories.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Good to continue?
Yes.
All right. So there was a second piece of this, and there's a lot more detail here that we're not going to talk about today. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of what other kind of information we have. Within each of those topics, there were specific goal statements, and those are what are in the attachment that you see. Participants were asked to rank them on a scale of, I support this idea, and I want it to be a priority for regional funding, all the way down to I do not support. And the interim ones are like either, maybe it's okay, I'm not really sure, and I like the idea, but I don't think we should be prioritizing funding for it. So there's kind of this sliding scale of level of support. And that the results and the priority areas differed from some of our prioritization. So we might have seen, for example, a really important topic in competitive economy that people ranked high, but overall, they ranked that topic really low. So they said, we like this one statement, but as the topic overall, we rated it lower. And there is also some nuances by groups that responded. So I just wanted to give you some sense of that. This is a particular statement that we put out there about equity, that historically disadvantaged communities are better connected to jobs, education, and other opportunities through transportation investments. And you can see the solid blue being strongly support, that light blue being we support it, but we don't want funding, and then the gray being somewhat indifferent to the idea. No one did not support this idea, which is great. And this one generally had very strong support, across the board. But you can see there is some variability in the types of agencies that responded to this about that level of support. That one, though, is not as stark as this one in terms of differences. So this was one of our land use and growth statements that we put out there, that newly developing areas of the region are supported with transportation investments that are appropriate for their local development patterns. And you can see a pretty stark difference between some of our respondent groups in terms of their support for that statement, including at the bottom there, a very stark difference between urban core cities and suburban cities. Suburban ones tend to being the ones that have new, greenfield level growth versus redevelopment. And so we have a breakdown similar to this for all of the questions. I just wanted to let you know that that's going to be out there in the report, but we're not going to go into that detail today. So all of that context being taken into account, we started to draft 2050 TPP objectives. And as I said, we started with the draft statements that we had put out for that feedback, but we also were reacting to some of the changes that were happening through the conversations with the committee of the whole around the Regional Development Guide goals. Recognizing that we were going to have to nest all of our statements underneath those goals, we were kind of getting direction from above and direction from below in terms of our intensive engagement. And we ultimately ended up editing a lot of our statements that we put out for feedback just to better align with regional goals. We consolidated some concepts because there was overlap, and we felt like, we don't want to have 50 statements of what's important. We want to have it to be a very succinct list. And some objectives were not recommended for advancement, and I'm going to talk about those specifically towards the end. So just to state, each of the goal areas from the Regional Development Guide and what we're currently proposing for our objectives in the TPP. The first one I already had mentioned, that historically disadvantaged communities are better connected to jobs, education, and other opportunities through transportation investments. This one's actually really well supported, fairly easy for us to measure, and fairly easy for us to develop policies for investment around. And so I think people in general support the statement. The second one there is about disparate impacts and harms and injustices to Black, Indigenous, and people of color being repaired and eliminated. So you think about making improvements in corridors like Rondo Corridor and I-94, really trying to right the wrongs of the past and make sure that we don't have disparate impacts moving forward. is the point of that one. The third one there is recognizing that we have people who have different abilities and disabilities in this region, and that we need to provide transportation services and infrastructure that meet the needs of those people. A different form of equity than, say, the racial-based focus that we've often had in Thrive statements, but all still important.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry, there's a question from Councilmember Carter.
Thank you. You spoke about the support and the ability to measure. Item number 1, did you find the same to be true in terms of support and the sense that these are measurable for items 2 and 3? And is that what you're showing us here, then the culling together of those that fell out as distinct and likely to be included then?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter, I will say that some statements are certainly more measurable than others. And part of our next phase is to figure that out. We are going to be developing performance measures for these. Generally speaking, I think most of these terms are measurable, but we do have some studies, particularly in equity, that we're conducting in MTS to help answer some of these questions. And we even have a study about freeway harms and injustices that we're going to be kicking off sometime next year that'll help us measure that. So we might not have the perfect answer, but we'll always be working towards it because we have this direction at the higher level that we should be.
We're in the process of development, and as you were showing us this, these will likely end up as the recommendations you're making for the plan and for the content for transportation, right?
Yeah, with the caveat that you're the first ones to see them publicly, so we have to go through the engagement process. But yes, this is the proposal today.
This is really good work. I appreciate the development of the process of working on the regional development guide and specifically on the systems for transportation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. Yeah, it's great to be on the council as we begin this regional development guide process. Councilmember Dokar.
Could I make a couple of comments? I have to leave exactly at 6.
Okay, sure.
6. Because I looked through all the goals and just a general feedback. First, thank you. This is really great work. And the variability on how people rated was actually really helpful. Generally, at the last council-wide meeting, I think the consensus or recommendation was to do the people, community first language. And so as I looked through this, every one of them, you could probably start with people and community. Like, even in the first one, you'll say people and community who've been marginalized and impacted by bisected highways are better connected. So starting everything with people and community as like the first language and really centering them for every goal. The second comment I had is under the title that says our region is dynamic and resilient. And I think I was one of the people who said that statement did not capture what Michael was presenting as a way he wanted to capture in terms of economy and how robust he wanted our region to do well. And so when I look at the goals that you have established, that misalignment shows up. Because you speak more to the resilient, the way I think about climate, the way I think about natural disasters, and I think he presented it as economy and businesses and jobs. And so that misalignment is showing up. And then my last comment around climate is just a request, is to just start with saying our region or Met Council will invest in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, keeping it much more simple in statement and much more of a do action. Thank you for all the work that went into it. This is absolutely great. Thank you.
If you have a response, otherwise.
Yeah, I do. I recognize you have to leave. I am going to talk about the economy one. We have a slide on that. And I will just say that was a point of conflict with us internally when we were drafting the vision goals. And you'll hear why based on a lot of the feedback we got from our stakeholders. So I'll make sure I can follow up with you specifically on that. I don't want to get too far ahead of the presentation because there's a lot to cover in the interim, but Just a note that we've had a lot of those conversations about that misalignment, and I think we're still working through them. So we're
Thank you.
aware.
I think that's a great suggestion, and you may even want to include Michael
Okay,
in
sounds
that
perfect.
conversation.
Thank you.
Did we get every question? I know we have a few more items and pages to go through, so you want to continue?
Just a few. The second goal topic was our communities are healthy and safe, and you can see we have a lot to say about this in the transportation policy plan. So because this was the number one objective, number one statement from a lot of our partners, we tried to make as many statements as we could be a priority here that people valued in our engagement. So we have a statement that people do not die or face life-changing injuries in all forms of transportation. People feel safe, more comfortable, and more welcome in all forms. So there's a difference between physically being safe and feeling safe. And then we have one about regional investments mitigating and avoiding harms to people caused by nearby transportation. So that's really on the health side. We don't want to have a lot of pollution. We don't want to have a lot of noise pollution, those kind of aspects. People are better connected to by transportation to community and cultural resources that support their physical, emotional, and mental health. That's really about community building and the important role transportation can play in that aspect of community. And then people are healthier through increased walking, rolling, and biking, active forms of transportation. So you can pause there.
Well, just one comment. I mean, we can design our communities in ways that increase walking, rolling, and biking. I just got back from a trip from Vegas, and I remember it's very similar, the amount of walking that I did in Vegas to the amount of walking that I did when I was in New Orleans. Those cities and the areas that, people are using the most are designed for walking. So it's just very encouraging to see that is a part of our 2050 Regional Development Guide.
Yeah, and I will say it's even on this next one too. So it's not even one objective that just shows up once, because it is that important from what we saw in our engagement. So on the dynamic and resilient goal, this is where some of the heart of important investment categories that we have in transportation show up. So people and businesses trust infrastructure and services will withstand and recover quickly from natural and human-caused disruptions. Now, Councilmember Dolker mentioned that this is a very resilient, focused statement. And it is because we invest a lot of money in transportation to make sure things don't fall down or break that cause significant disruptions to our system. And they're not all climate change related. And I think that the idea that we talked about resilience and climate change exclusively was problematic for transportation, because it's not the only reason we do things for resilience. And so we thought this objective belonged here because it is about making sure that the system works for people and is kept, in good repair and operation. The other three are more about how people move. So people can better meet their daily needs using affordable travel options beyond driving alone. So to get to your point, Chair Chambliss, that's another one that says we should be investing in those other modes, making them more comfortable with fewer barriers, because they're efficient ways to travel in our system. The third one there is that people have timelier and more predictable travel times to reach their destinations, basically when using all modes. We list them out there so that folks know we're talking about all modes. And then people and businesses, and this is the important aspect of that one, is the businesses part, because it's about reliable, time and cost-effective movement of freight and goods. So this is the only place where really a freight objective shows up, and we know that that's really important. Especially when we met with MFAC, the Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee, they emphasized this a lot. And so this is part of being dynamic and resilient as a region, is providing those types of outcomes for our people and goods and businesses. This one was a little more straightforward. In fact, the next two are a little more straightforward in transportation. We do have a regional development guide goal about leading our region on addressing climate change. And so in transportation, we hope to minimize our contributions to climate change from transportation by supporting or exceeding state goals for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. As Councilmember Dolker said, we don't have to necessarily be that specific at the very end, but we thought it was important to acknowledge that we're going to be aligning ourselves with state goals, and that's not just the metro area's role to do that. And the last one is about protecting and restoring natural systems. And so in transportation, as we invest, we want projects that do help protect and restore natural systems along with transportation investments. So, we list out the different types of systems you can think about there: air, water quality, natural habitat, all things that good transportation projects should be making better as they're investing, or at least protecting them to the degree that they can. So we do have a pause here to see if anybody has any other comments or questions on those objectives. The next part is to go into what didn't make the cut, which I think is going to be where there's maybe even some additional discussion. So I want to pause here and just see if there's any other comments first.
Member Vento.
I don't want us to have to wish we had brought sleeping bags, and we don't have to belabor this question or get too wrapped up in it tonight, but I think we should think about, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in the objectives, but somewhere in the transportation portion, I think it's important for us to make a statement about the development of our transit systems. And this is kind of as the result of the hearing last week where the Office of the Legislative Auditor gave their most recent report. And regardless of what the report says, how we responded, there's a sentiment out there that we need to improve our capacity and our ability. And there was even the suggestion that perhaps we shouldn't be developing these systems anymore. They should be handed off to somebody else. So I think it's somewhere in our portion of the plan, I think we need to make a statement about our commitment moving toward 2050 to use the resources, to invest the resources in as effective and efficient and taxpayer responsive way so that we can get out from under what we're dealing with, and so that our 2050 plan doesn't become a target for criticism because we're not acknowledging it. I don't know how to say it any better than that other than to get blunt, and I don't want to do that, but.
Well, I do, I guess my response is that the Regional Development Guide is focused very much on our goal statements and our regional goals for the next 10 years. We can learn from the things that challenge us. We can learn from the opportunities that we see in front of us. And looking at it at the high level is where we want to keep our focus. But certainly as we roll this out and present it, I would say speaking to our level of commitment and what it takes to achieve these goals would be very valuable, including how we partner to achieve these goals.
Right.
And so I think we want to make sure that we include that piece before it's presented and also as a part of our regional development guide.
Yeah, if I can, Madam Chair, just an additional response there is that we absolutely agree, and we have this level called policies and actions that's coming next. And I think what the policies and actions should be saying is how do we go about achieving those outcomes? And so you guys have already adopted a transitway advancement policy that'll make its way into the 2050 TPP. There's certainly going to be other things we're going to want to say about how we make sure that our actions are, being good stewards of public dollars. And so we hear you, and in fact, we heard some of that in the engagement, that maybe we should say things about how we operate. We plan to say all of that in our policies sections, and that those policies will be getting us to the outcomes we want for the people and businesses of the region. But definitely we hear that, and we've heard that from other people, so.
Thanks.
Now I got to find out.
And
where I
thanks for
was.
pointing out the policy piece of it.
It's a lot. to
It's a
take
lot.
in. Any other questions before I move on to the next? All right, I'm going to start with the probably most controversial one, which is that you might see that we are not planning to have any objectives about repairing or replacing the system. And you might be asking yourself, why not? Isn't that a really important part? Isn't that where we spend 90% of our dollars is on repairing and replacing the system? And we do, and it's a major investment category. So I think our partners are going to ask, why aren't you saying this is a major outcome? Because it's such a big part of why we invest. And I want to point to the second bullet there, which is that the community feedback we got, not the agencies that do the fixing, but the members of the community that experience transportation, said things like, why would you just maintain what's out there but doesn't work? You know, why are you just repairing the system that doesn't work for us today? And so we thought that was a really interesting perspective to ask ourselves, why are we replacing and repairing stuff? Is it to be resilient? You know, is it to address equity? Is it to address natural systems? And that really, when projects are repairing and replacing major infrastructure, they should look at what other outcomes can they achieve when we know they're going to do that. I mean, no one's going to say repair and replace isn't important. And so we're trying to push people to go further with their repair and replace projects. And the reason that we're suggesting it's not a separate objective is because it often is used to justify not making investments in our other objectives. You know, people will say, we can't address equity, we have to spend all our money in repair and replace. And so we're trying to say, that is no longer the way we want to have this conversation. Every project should be thinking about equity and climate and safety, even when you're repairing and replacing. And so that's going to be a pretty big shift for a lot of our partners in this region to not say repair and replace is important. But we're trying to reframe it and to say it's going to be important, it's going to have policies, but it's not an outcome we're trying to achieve. The outcomes are the other statements that we say are important in TPP. So I'm going to pause there because it's going to be a big deal. We're going to hear about it from our partners. You're going to hear about it from local governments in your community. Even MnDOT will probably have some things to say about not saying repair and replace as an objective. But I wanted to kind of pause and say, did it make sense? Do you have significant concerns with that approach moving forward?
Councilmember
I
Carr?
think that makes a lot of sense. You know, as I recall taking the survey and answering the questions, I think I'm one of the people that said we do everything. I found myself doing that. And we do a lot, but the why we do it is really what's more important. And I think that's what you were just saying. I want to endorse that because there are some things that we are accustomed to doing, and you're right, we'll do them forever and we'll count how we do them. We'll talk about how much money we spend doing them. And in the end, unless we understand the why, we may not accomplish the bold objectives that we're setting forth here. And I just want to check mark that. I would talk more about it, but I can't. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cameron.
So I want to ask, the framing of this is that the community feedback is in opposition to repair, replace, and modernize, but that's not necessarily how I am reading it. And I think, you know, are we able to, if we're not moving forward with that objective, are we able to capture what the community feedback is getting at around infrastructure and objectives? Because I don't want it to, I think their vision is slightly different, but it is still focusing on this area of infrastructure. And so, you know, how are we capturing that rather than just eliminating this objective altogether? Maybe we're redirecting it to better address what the community is getting at. But is that I didn't really see it in the objectives that you presented.
Yeah, Madam Chair and council members, I can respond. I think what we're not necessarily saying that's the reason. We're saying it actually helped us change our perspective on that objective, hearing that kind of feedback. If you were to think about the transit system as a very clear example, we have switches on the rail system that we have to replace if they go bad. We don't replace them just because they need to be replaced. We replace them because we want a reliable system, and that's one of our other objectives. And so it really helped us ask the question, why do we repair and replace? One of MnDOT's primary performance measures is pavement quality. Well, should we have an objective that says the pavement should be smooth? Or should we have an objective that says people should have a comfortable ride that they enjoy? What are we actually trying to get at when we do that? So it really just helped us think about why are we saying these things and how are people interpreting them? I wouldn't say it was the primary justification for this change.
Okay, but you see it, that community piece folding into the reliability.
Yeah, or just make sure that your outcomes are people-focused and not infrastructure-focused in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and resiliency is a part of that, and so I think it fits under there as well. So I really appreciate your explanations and the questions to help us get grounded in what these objectives really mean.
Well, the next one was discussed earlier as well, competitive economy. This is probably the other one that's difficult to grapple with. We put out some competitive economy objectives about attracting and retaining talent and businesses by being nationally competitive with how we provide a transportation system. And that sounds great. I think a lot of people like that statement, but what we actually heard were that the actual idea of investing in economy is investing in your other objectives in transportation. So if you say you want to have good travel times, safe system, that will inherently lead to a strong economy. And so you're actually measuring the economic impact of the system by looking at all of your other transportation objectives. And I can tell you that we ran into a bit of this problem in the 2040 TPP because we did have a goal that was competitive economy, and we rarely used it because we had no way to measure it. All of our other measures were on things like access to destinations or safety. And so we kind of heard that from our partners. This is a great concept, but it's not necessarily an objective that you can measure the direct impact of transportation investments. And so this is a little bit where our pushback against saying there's a goal that's about the economy comes from. It's great to say it's important, but it's really hard to tie directly to how we invest in a system. So I'll pause there because I'm sure that's going to elicit feedback.
I think it really does speak to the why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing what we're doing to be competitive. And it might even be a part of our analysis, like when you do this SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The opportunities connect directly with the competitive economy. Councilmember Vento.
Well, I was just going to say, initially I got kind of squirmed a little bit with it, but going back and looking at the third objective statement, our region is dynamic and resilient, that resolved it all for me. That's the bullets there basically point out our commitment to a competitive economy.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I can respond to that, part of what, and it's on the last bullet on this slide, when we say competitive economy, sometimes what ends up happening is people use that in their own way because it's so open to interpretation that we get communities justifying investments that we wouldn't otherwise support because they can say your plan says a competitive economy is important and this is important to, even if they say our local economy, they'll say that. And so that's the risk in saying a competitive economy is one of our objectives as opposed to saying dynamic and resilient region. So recognizing that's an ongoing discussion at the goal level that I know you all are still having as a committee of the whole, just trying to give you the transportation perspective and how we're taking that moving forward. Okay, so I have two other topics that we're not advancing. And again, the land use one I already kind of talked about. There wasn't strong support for land use goals and objectives in transportation investment decision-making. That being said, we know there's a clear nexus between the two. And we do think that the land use policy plan from community development can address some of these topics that are listed on the left. And so we're going to be working with them on that. They already have draft objectives that talk about, investing in land use near transit systems and things like that, because we already have regional policies around that. So while this is not advancing in the TPP, we do see another path for some of these statements to exist in another system plan. And then the last one here is on resilience. We had a statement about protecting people from extreme weather and resulting outcomes. This was not a strongly supported objective. I think it was a little too specific for some of our partners to think needs to be an objective. And we do think it overlaps with some of our other objectives on reducing the impacts to people. Like I was saying with air quality and floods, you can be inclusive of heat and extreme weather in that. So this one I think is a pretty simple, it didn't advance because we think it's already covered with some of our other objective statements. So to tidy this up and show you a chart that I'm sure you might be seeing from some of the other system plans, this shows how all of those proposed objectives relate to the current regional development guide statements. And we're saying that there's clearly a primary relationship for all these, but many of our objectives relate to multiple goals, and we want to make sure that we show that, because objective that can get at multiple goals is usually a higher priority objective if you look at it at its core. And so this table just helps illustrate that a lot of our objective statements get at multiple regional development guide goals as proposed. Just noting that we're moving on beyond this with some more engagement. Today, you're the first group to really see this full presentation. We're giving the same presentation to our technical working group, which is staff from agencies around the region, this Thursday. I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time on repair and replace and modernize. We're also going to be presenting to the advisory work group, which is the policymaker level group, next Friday. And then we'll continue to refine. We have actually just released our first newsletter on the TPP. I'm sure you all are all familiar with newsletters that projects and other aspects of the council release. So we're going to do a monthly one. And we think in August it might be a good time to put these out for some public reaction. If there's general agreement from the council and from our partners that we're ready to do that. So we haven't quite shaped that out yet. We'll then be working on those really important policies and actions that say, how are we actually going to achieve these? What are the different steps and investments that we're going to make? And as I stated, there's performance measure development happening concurrently as well that we're going to kick off later this year. So a lot of work still coming, but we think this is a really pivotal step because this gives us that strategic direction to start having these more detailed discussions about policies and measures that we're going to be kicking off in the next month. So with that, I have one more couple of slides just to let you know that we're working on a chapter structure for the TPP. For those who don't know, the TPP is the longest system plan by about a factor of 10. It's about 600 pages. And it's because we have all of these investment directions that are system specific, like highways and transit, that have important policies like the transit market areas that you saw earlier, highway investment criteria. And so we have all those chapters, and those are going to continue to exist. We're adding some new chapters, though, that tie out to the Regional Development Guide goals. And the real important point there is that we want to make a linkage between what the TPP does to help advance the region's goals. So it's going to be these new chapters that'll say, here's what healthy and safe means to transportation. Here's how we're going to measure it. Here are our objectives. Here are the important investment categories that exist that are described in more detail in the rest of the plan. But we're going to these are going to be like a strong linkage chapter to tell the public, how do our investments relate to our vision? And so they're going to be relatively brief, but really, really important. And so we'll probably spend some time with you all on these draft chapters late this year, early next year.
Question by Councilmember Vento.
Just a quick question. In those chapters, isn't that an area where you can address the repair, replace, and modernize? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, we're for sure going to have policies related to that. And I think there's a lot of different objectives that we can say why we're doing those things. But again, we want to make sure that they're not just repairing and replacing, that they're trying to
Right.
address other objectives. So a quick schedule update too. We are, as I said, we're trying to wrap up this goals and objectives discussion so that we can move into the policies and actions. We're going to start writing all of those chapters that I showed on the previous slide, actually next month. And we're going to start piecemeal taking these to our technical working group over about a 6-month period. So they're going to be getting about 3 chapters a month starting in September of this year. That level of detail, those chapters, we will not be bringing to you all, though we can certainly bring some really important ones to you all. But we're going to spend some time with those technical groups, letting them actually specifically edit and comment on our chapters as drafts over time. It's a lot to give them at once, so we're going to try to space it out over many months, which is why we need to get this important work done now, because unfortunately, we have to release a plan in March of next year. So that's all I have today. Welcome any more questions or comments that you have.
Any questions, comments? Councilmember Carter.
Form, but not just form, fit for our community that is happening with any consulting organization. I know that you've done work in the past with, for example, Center for Economic Inclusion. Are they involved in any way in helping us to contextualize, or are there others who are working with us in that regard?
Madam Chair and council members, one of the things I will say is this line here on contributing studies and plans. Center for Economic Inclusion is a sub-consultant on our equity investment study. And so we have all kinds of involvement from partners through those studies. They're usually topical specific, but we definitely bring forward all of that feedback that we get during, studies that have been going on for years in some cases. I'm working on a study that kicked off in early 2022 still. And so we've gotten a lot of involvement from a variety of stakeholders, and we're going to summarize all of that when we put out the draft plan, because it's not just when you're writing what you're doing and where you're hearing feedback. It's all the work that went into thinking about the concept that influences what we put on paper. But to your specific question, are they helping us to write or contextualize the plan? I think we're working through a communications plan right now. We have communications staff assigned to help us edit and write, and they're going to figure out where we need external assistance. And so we're kind of working through that right now. And we'll certainly give them that feedback.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Cole. I really appreciate the depth of this presentation, and having that transportation policy plan timeline lets us know how much work there is to get that 600-plus page document produced. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we have no other business items to talk about, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks for tolerating me.
Oh, no, I'm glad you were able to, tough it out.
The whole process has been